Welcome to Supplement Saturday. If you've spent any time looking at sports nutrition supplements, you've probably come across L-Carnitine. You may have seen it in capsules, powders, or drinks. You may have heard it discussed alongside exercise, energy, recovery, or fat metabolism. And there's a fascinating reason for that. L-Carnitine really does play an important role in the way our bodies handle fat. But understanding that statement properly requires us to go a little deeper than the front of a supplement bottle. So today, let's explore L-Carnitine. What exactly is it? What does it do inside the body? Where do we naturally obtain it? What does the research tell us about supplementation? And perhaps most importantly, where might L-Carnitine fit within a healthy lifestyle? Let's begin with the name. L-Carnitine is a naturally occurring compound that our bodies can produce using the amino acids lysine and methionine. Most of the body's carnitine is stored in skeletal and cardiac muscle, tissues with significant energy demands. We also obtain carnitine through our diet, particularly from animal-derived foods. Red meat is one of the richest dietary sources, while fish, poultry, and dairy products can also contribute varying amounts. But the really interesting part is what carnitine does. To understand that, imagine one of your muscle cells. Inside that cell are tiny structures called mitochondria. You've probably heard mitochondria described as the powerhouses of the cell. That's a simplified description, but it's useful because mitochondria are heavily involved in producing the energy our cells need. Fatty acids can be an important fuel source. However, long-chain fatty acids cannot simply move freely into the mitochondrial matrix where they can undergo beta oxidation. They need help. This is where the carnitine shuttle becomes important. Through a series of biochemical steps, carnitine helps transport long-chain fatty acids across the inner mitochondrial membrane so that they can enter the mitochondrial matrix and be oxidized for energy. So when somebody tells you that L-carnitine is involved in fat metabolism, there is genuine physiology behind that statement. But now, we arrive at an extremely important distinction. A nutrient being involved in a metabolic pathway does not automatically mean that consuming more of that nutrient will accelerate the entire pathway. Think about a factory. If a particular worker helps move materials from one room to another, employing twice as many of that worker, doesn't necessarily mean the factory will produce twice as many products. Other factors may already determine the speed of production. Human metabolism is considerably more complicated than a factory, but the analogy helps illustrate an important principle. This is why we should separate biological mechanism from clinical outcome. L-carnitine has an established physiological role. The question of what happens when somebody takes additional L-carnitine as a supplement is a different scientific question, and the answer depends on context. Researchers have investigated L-carnitine across several areas, including exercise performance, recovery, aging, cardiovascular health, and metabolic health. The findings are identical across every population or every outcome. Some studies and analyses have reported potential benefits in particular circumstances, while other outcomes remain inconsistent or modest. That's not unusual in nutrition science. The effects of a supplement can depend on factors such as someone's baseline nutritional status, age, diet, health condition, dosage, duration of supplementation, and the outcome being measured. This is one reason I don't think the most useful question is simply, does L-carnitine work? Work for what? For whom? Under what circumstances? And compared with what? Those questions lead to a much more meaningful conversation. Take fat loss as an example. Because L-carnitine transports fatty acids into mitochondria, it's understandable why it became associated with fat-burning products. But taking L-carnitine shouldn't be interpreted as switching on a fat-burning button. Long-term changes in body fat are influenced by the overall energy balance of the body, dietary patterns, physical activity, muscle mass, sleep, hormones, genetics, and many other factors. That doesn't make L-carnitine irrelevant. It simply puts its biological role into context. And context is something I want us to keep returning to throughout Supplement Saturday. Supplements aren't isolated from the rest of our lives. They enter an existing biological and lifestyle environment. Now let's look at exercise, because skeletal muscle contains large amounts of carnitine and relies heavily on energy metabolism. Researchers have naturally investigated whether supplementation could influence exercise performance or recovery. Again, the picture is more nuanced than many marketing messages suggest. Some research has explored potential effects on recovery markers, muscle soreness, and aspects of exercise metabolism. But results can vary, and L-carnitine should not be viewed as a substitute for the fundamentals of performance. Training remains fundamental. Adequate nutrition remains fundamental. Hydration matters. Sleep matters. recovery matters, and appropriate programming matters. A supplement where appropriate sits on top of those foundations. There's another interesting aspect of carnitine that doesn't receive as much attention. Our bodies normally maintain carnitine through a combination of dietary intake, internal production, and highly efficient conservation by the kidneys. That means the amount somebody consumes through food doesn't tell us the whole story. Individual circumstances matter. For example, dietary intake tends to be lower in people consuming predominantly plant-based diets because many of the richest food sources are animal-derived. However, lower dietary intake does not automatically mean deficiency because the body can synthesize carnitine and regulate its stores. There are also specific medical circumstances in which carnitine status becomes clinically important. Certain genetic disorders can interfere with carnitine transport or metabolism. Some medical treatments and health conditions can also affect carnitine levels. In those situations, carnitine isn't simply a fitness supplement sitting on a shop shelf. It can have a legitimate clinical role under medical supervision. And I think that's an important reminder about supplements generally. The same substance can have very different relevance depending on the person using it and why they're using it. So where does all of this leave somebody standing in a supplement shop looking at a bottle of L-Carnitine? I would begin with purpose. What are you hoping the supplement will help you achieve? Are you interested in exercise performance, recovery, a particular nutritional concern? Or have you simply heard that L-Carnitine burns fat? Once the goal is clear, we can examine whether the evidence actually supports that goal and whether supplementation makes sense within the individual circumstances. Then look at the foundation underneath it. How is your nutrition? How regularly are you moving? Are you resistance training? If strength and body composition are important goals. Are you sleeping adequately? Are you recovering from your training? Are there health conditions or medications that should be considered? Those questions aren't designed to discourage supplementation. They're designed to make supplementation more intelligent, because that is where I believe supplements belong, not as competitors to healthy living, not as replacements for food, and not as products we should automatically dismiss. They are tools. And like any tool, their value depends on what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's appropriate for the job and how it's being used. That philosophy also explains why food remains part of this conversation. L-carnitine occurs naturally in foods, particularly red meat, with smaller amounts available from other animal-derived foods. Now, those foods aren't simply delivery vehicles for carnitine. They provide protein and many other nutrients as part of the overall diet. This is why I like looking at nutrition as a complete system rather than chasing isolated nutrients. Then, when supplementation is appropriate, it becomes something that complements that system. And that's the bigger lesson I want you to take away from today's Supplement Saturday. L-carnitine is fascinating. It plays a genuine and important role in transporting long-chain fatty acids into mitochondria, allowing those fatty acids to participate in energy production. That biological role helps explain why L-carnitine has attracted so much interest in sports nutrition and metabolic health. But good health education requires us to go one step further. Mechanism tells us how something works. Evidence helps us understand whether changing that mechanism through supplementation produces meaningful outcomes. And individual context helps determine whether those outcomes are relevant to you. Those three things should always travel together. Mechanism, evidence, context. That's how we move beyond both marketing hype and unnecessary skepticism. We don't have to label every supplement as either amazing or useless. We can understand it, we can examine the evidence, we can consider the individual, and then we can make an informed decision. So if L-carnitine is something you've been considering, begin by asking what you're hoping to achieve and where supplementation would fit within the bigger picture of your nutrition, movement, sleep, recovery, and overall health. And if you're uncertain whether L-carnitine is appropriate for your individual health or performance goals, that's where personalized guidance can be valuable. Thank you for joining me for Supplement Saturday. The goal of this series is simple: to help you understand supplements so that your decisions are informed by science, context, and your own health goals. For daily science-backed health insights, follow or DM me, Coach Kwanz